All right. Nick Pollard. People pleasers are some of the most dishonest people in the world. What do you mean when you say that?
Um, when you look at what people pleasing is, right? So it's more of a constellation of behaviors than it's a behavior in itself. So, and underlying in that constellation are these ideas of like conflict avoidance. Um, they have the best way to say it is that they have kind of a loose relationship with the truth in many ways. So, when conflict avoidance is inherently dishonest, when you're not speaking your mind, you're being dishonest. When you're not voicing your opinion in opposition to something that's whether right or wrong, you're being dishonest. Um, when you procrastinate, you're being dishonest. There's all these things that people don't want to call it dishonesty. They want to call it something else, right? Well, I'm trying to keep the peace. Okay, so you're denying your feelings in an effort to make everyone else around you happy, but that is dishonest, right? So when you think about honesty in just in the crux of what it means to be a people pleaser, it's the biggest issue that I run up against with people. Is they're always hiding behaviors. Very often you'll find that that perfectionism where they'll pretend something didn't happen, right? And I used to do all that stuff, and so it's when I say it, that's what I mean, is that people pleasing is inherently dishonest, and it's a dishonest way to live your life. It's a dishonest way to function inside of yourself, and that's why it's so toxic.
What is your definition of people pleasing?
People pleasing is I think I accidentally said it already, is people pleasing is not a behavior in itself. It's a category of behaviors, right? But if I was to put a definition on it, it would be the sacrifice of self in order to manage your toxic shame.
That's a good one.
So everything a people pleaser does, it has really one purpose, which is shame management, right? It's the I'm not good enough, I'll never be enough kind of belief systems that are playing behind that in whatever form it is. But there's only two key human fears anyway. It's right. I won't be appreciated, I won't be loved, and that's it, right? And it is playing on those, of course. But when your whole life is built around managing shame in one way or another, then you do things that are just inherently dishonest.
And people pleasing, would you consider that manipulation?
Yes.
Okay. And selfish too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Dr. Robert Glover talks about this in the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. I don't know if you ever saw that book or if you've ever met him, but
I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really? Dr. Glover is he's a colleague and a friend, and he talks about covert contracts. Probably you mentioned that in yours, and the people pleaser does the same thing, right? So we're talking about giving to get is a big component of what people pleasing is. We're giving away our time, we're giving away our energy, we're giving away our resources in order to get love and acceptance. And what that means is we're always trying to fit in rather than belong. Right? So if you think of it in the context of what does it mean to be a pleaser, it means that you are going to give yourself away with the hope that other people are going to give to you. Right? Or trying to earn that other people will give to you. And then when they don't, you develop resentments, you develop these unkind, dishonest behaviors, and you start to do the things that kind of are associated with that, which is manipulative, guilt tripping. It's not the same, it's not on the same through line as narcissism by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's kind of your path and the thing you talk about, but it's not as manipulative.
I think it's very important to cut away the BS with people pleasing as you do, because that is really what it is. It's trying to manage other people's impression of you. It is being dishonest. It is being selfish. It is being manipulative. Yes, it sounds harsh, but in reality, it's true.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also interesting that it is a manipulation behavior and or a category, a manipulative category anyway. And one of the things that I say that very often gets me in trouble is that if you pour alcohol on top of a people pleaser, you will get a narcissist.
Okay. I can see it.
Right. Almost every single time. Because, what does alcohol do? It lowers your inhibitions and allows you to be more of everything you've ever wanted to be and everything you never wanted to be. right? So you become highly manipulative. You become even more so manipulative, and you become more toxic, and you become more gaslighting, and all those things start to come out in your behaviors. And there's one of the things that, and this is not just alcohol; it's really all substances. Anybody who's ever dealt with addiction knows that every addict is called a narcissist until they recover, and then we find out who they actually are. But very often, people pleasers tend to really lean into narcissism when they're addicted to substances.
Sure. Now, do you buy into the disease of addiction model?
Now you're going to get me in trouble. I think calling it a disease is probably appropriate. But I think that making it an incurable disease is bullshit.
Okay. That's an interesting distinction. I think that narcissism and the disease of alcoholism or addiction, pretty similar in a lot of ways, I would say.
Sure.
And when you go through a step working guide to do the steps, I think if a narcissist were to do those things, I think it'd help them if they were willing to honestly take a look at it, which is a big if.
Right.
It could help them just as much as it helps the addict, in my opinion. But what would you think?
I think narcissistic personality disorder exists kind of outside of that framework. I think anybody that chooses to be better can be better, right? That's part of my whole shtick is that, like, what you don't change, you choose, right? And the problem with narcissistic personality disorder, if it's a true disordered narcissist, like if it's not just my girlfriend thinks I'm a narcissist, like you've gone to a doctor and they're like, you're a fucking narcissist. Like you got the thing, right? They can't cure that, but you can treat it just like anything else, right? And I do think step work could probably be valuable in that. I think it's probably more, I think the therapeutic modalities in terms of, kind of real live counseling is probably more important.
Sure.
Because I think they do function very much the same. So if you look at addiction, what are we trying to do when we're in active addiction? We're trying to manage our shame, right? That's really what it's about. Nobody wants to do, well, I've got trauma. No, you're trying to manage your shame around the trauma. It's all about this kind of, I'm not good enough, I'm a piece of shit. Like if I ask any addict in any rehab center anywhere in the world, what is your number one limiting belief system? They're going to say, I'm a piece of shit. It is this. It's the same across the board every time, everywhere I go, right? They'll say it in French, Spanish, doesn't matter. Piece of shit, right? So the thing is the narcissist is avoiding that belief, right? Whereas a people pleaser is in that belief. And then, so you're kind of playing in the same field. And that's why they very often run parallel. So one of the things I talk about in a video I did not long ago is around burnout and how it shows up in people pleasers, right? And there's a kind of an inverse scale in the pleaser set where you think your life is going to get better as you grow financially, right? But what actually happens with a people pleaser is like it gets better financially, but their relationships like get worse. So they actually kind of cross over and things start to get exponentially worse and people are using them even harder. And then that's where burnout shows up. And then very often, that's when I get a phone call.
And that reminds me what Jim Carrey had to say about that. He said he wishes everyone can get rich and famous so they find out that that's not the answer.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not rich. I do well for myself, but I've got more fame than I've ever had. And that's pretty cool. That's neat. But there's times it's really not. Like I was in Costa Rica and somebody walked up to me and they wanted to take a selfie. And I'm like, dude, I'm just like chilling,
So celebrity down there.
Oh, fuck, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if celebrity is the word, but it's close enough, right? It's close enough to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that?
I like it, I guess. So it's not really a deal with it. It's very rare. I mean, it's not like I don't have the paparazzi follow me around. I'm not Tom Cruise, but when it happens, it's usually somebody that's appreciating my work. And, sometimes it's really cool, man. Like, I've had people, cry and tell me that they love me and that, that my work has impacted their lives. And, I get emails every day saying, you saved my marriage or, I didn't kill myself. Like, You probably have to bleep that for Instagram, but I get those kinds of emails, and I'm usually pretty amazed at what, just speaking my heart has been able to do.
That is pretty cool. And I know before we went live here, we were talking about audience capture and what do you do to not kind of get sucked into what the audience wants you to make and do what is true to yourself. How do you deal with that?
I think monetization has brought with it some problems because realistically, I mean, I love doing this, and I do want to make a living, and I do make it. I do make a living doing, my coaching practice is thriving, and I do pretty well. And so I think there's times that I get tired of talking about fucking boundaries, and tired of talking about people pleasing, and I just don't anymore. So one of the things I started to notice, I've never admitted this live, is that as my audience grows, they don't mind seeing some old shit from time to time. So I've now got my assistant working on a schedule where we're going to take all my old boundary stuff, all my old people pleaser stuff, anything that doesn't have, where I still had hair, we're going to get rid of. But we're going to take all that stuff and we're going to just rerun it across all platforms and kind of let it do what it does. So we're constantly building that brand still and doing that and offering that work. But the way I record is not orthodox. So it's hard for me to go out and put together a video of like, here's the 10 reasons you should have boundaries. It's not how I do shit. So when I go out, it's literally, I mean, I can show you what I do. I just pull out my phone and I'll put it right in front of me, and then I just start recording. Whatever.
You got a steady hand there. You got a steady hand because it doesn't even look like you're bopping up and down there at all when you do that.
I know, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so I don't really talk about, I guess audience capture has not been, it's a thing I fear, I think, because I want people to like the videos, but I also, I did an apology video the other day that I hadn't been talking about what I want to talk about. Right? What I've really wanted to talk about recently was men's work. And, so it's interesting you had Glover on recently because I'm in his certified coaching program. And when that's something I do, by the way, if you're ever hiring a coach and you're listening, or even you, Jared, don't hire coaches that don't believe in coaching. So, I spend a good chunk of my income, on my own self-improvement. But so as I go through that program, it's kind of recognizing myself, how important men's work has become to me. And, what do I want it to look like, and how do I want to show up in this world and doing that? So, it's a big deal. It's like, how do I make the most out of this thing? And yeah.
What do you see as the issues men are having right now?
I think we live in a world of men that have been raised by women. And it's not to say that women do a bad job raising men. It's just, they don't do the right things with regard to their temperament. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this. Glover talks a lot about this. A lot of guys out there are really talking about a lot of this, which is, boys learn differently than men, or boys learn differently than girls. And rather than teaching them where they are, we just medicated the shit out of an entire generation and told them to sit down and be quiet. Mm-hmm. Well, now we got an entire generation of boys that are just sitting down and being quiet. And we have an entire generation of women asking, where are all the men at? Right. Well, sorry. And there are guys like me that aren't afraid to say that. Right. I'm not afraid to tell you that, that men have kind of placated and pussied themselves into a corner where they can't play anymore. Right. And one of the things I've learned in my own journey, and I work on now, and I'm a part of 2 different men's groups, and I'm constantly hanging out with other guys, and like that's my joy. That's where I'm happiest. And by doing that, it makes the people around me, it makes me more attractive to women. It makes me feel better about myself, and it allows me to take masterful action toward meaningful goals, and that's what life is about. So I think that's what men are missing now is kind of, we're missing men. we're afraid to connect. And when we do connect, very often what I see, especially in the, the nice guys and the people pleasers, is, they'll start to connect with men and then they'll get a girlfriend and they'll throw it all away.
That's
right?
true. That's true.
So many guys get lost in their women, and then they wonder why their relationships end up tanking.
And that's where the boundaries come back into play too, because women, when they really like you, they want all your time. They're going to want to call you 5 times a day. And if you don't have boundaries, you'll be talking to them 5 times a day for an hour each time. And it's just, you don't have time for that. And that's where it'd be up for the man to put his foot down and say no. Like, that's what, I'm not sure if you've read this, but I know Dr. Glover talks about this book a lot, but The Way of the Superior Man. And he talks about, you have your mission and purpose first as a man, and you still want to love your woman with all of your heart, but you have to be like completely present with her when you're there, and completely present attention is much better than half divided attention for even if it's longer, but that concentrated time where it's completely focused, that's where it's at.
Well, it matters, right? And the same thing can be true or can be said about children. In my own kids, 10 minutes of undivided attention is much better than me being on my phone for an hour.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's true. I honestly think that's true for everybody. There's nothing I hate worse than trying to talk to somebody texting on their phone. And I think societally we've become kind of in that vein of people pleasing. I think we've become really consumed with external validation, and you couple that with instant access to everything you've ever wanted, right? Whether it's porn, or whether it's food deliveries, or whether it's I want to buy a dump truck. Like you can have it today, right? In every situation, and that's a problem, right? I think men want to make women happy. What they don't realize is that making women happy makes them miserable.
And that's when they're losing themselves, when they do it that way.
Right. You end up in a relationship that you really thought you were going to enjoy that's fucking miserable, right? Because you're giving yourself away all the time. And then I hear it from all the guy. I do everything. All I wanted was for her to make cookies.
That's the woe's me. That's the ego.
Right? Did you ask?
That.
Right? Did you ask her to make cookies? You fucking weirdo. No.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And that's the covert contract part too, where guys. It's the guys a lot of times that aren't as charismatic and they don't have as much of a sense of self-worth.
Sure.
They put themselves in these corners where they think, if I just do this, this, and this, and this is what Dr. Glover says too, I do this, this, and this, then they'll love me and give me a carefree life and give me sex and all that kind of good stuff.
I'll have a trouble-free life, and I'll have all the sex I want, and I'll be taken care of, and I'll have my needs met.
Right. And it's just not how it works at all. And I think, but doing what you're doing with him and just having a group of men, to me, that is so important. And that's where I tell men to open up to other men. Talk about your crap with other men, because other men are going to understand male problems. More so than most women will. It's not to say a woman's suggestions are useless. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying other men have experience with male problems. That's all.
100%. Well, and Jesus, you are trying to get me in trouble. This
it wouldn't be fun otherwise.
This is not going to be safe. I don't think. I struggle with the idea that women are telling men how to get better, because women have been telling us how to get better forever, and it hasn't worked this far. Right. So I liken that to the equivalent of bashing my head up against a wall, and expecting it to not bleed. Right. Like if I keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and getting the same result, I'm insane. Right. So I think very often men working with female coaches about manhood are failing. And that's because the feminine and the masculine don't operate cohesively in that way. They're not simpatico, right? So they require tension in order to be productive. So yeah, So when you think about what the feminine does, the feminine is more of a done to modality. The masculine is a doing modality. And everybody has a little of everything, right? So we all have some of that. Like I have a feminine side. It's
Yeah.
not something I nurture very often, but it's something I have. And the things that my feminine wants is, usually I like gifts. That when you think of love languages, it's very often in the feminine. I love gift receiving. I'm somebody who enjoys acts of service. I'm a physical touch person. Those are things that are validating to me, right? And those are things that it's okay to get from your partner. Like, and I think we get stuck too in this new world of like it's all or nothing. Red pill or blue pill, bitch. Like, I got shit to do. So yeah, I did a video on this today or yesterday that's kind of blowing up on me, and everybody's pissed off. But fuck them. And the general thought for me is nobody's fault. Nobody's life is anybody else's fault but yours. Right? Like what's happened to you very often, like trauma and those types of things. Of course, that's not your fault. You can't. There's no predictor for my dad was a giant piece of shit. Like he was a really bad dude. Is that I can't fault myself for that,
right?
But I can fault myself for how I'm reacting to it in my 40s.
Amen.
Right? And I can say, okay, well, my life is my fault, right? So, and that means both positive and negative, right? So when I have a particularly awesome month in sales, I'm like, my fault, right? My bad.
Now I love that. You say
right.
responsible for your trauma, right? You're responsible, not that it happened to you,
yeah.
but you're responsible for your recovery. That's
right.
always how I have seen it as well, because what other alternative is there? To
Right.
just be a victim about it, to me, and that doesn't do anyone any good. It's like, yes, you were a victim, but
right.
you don't have to stay a victim. Like take responsibility, and then not that it was your fault. And this is where people get into the nuance impaired, is what I
right.
call it. They can't. So it's like you said, red pill, blue pill. Your
right.
fault, not your fault. It's
right.
no in the middle there where something can be, there are some things you might have been able to do better, but it doesn't mean it was your fault. That nuanced line is, people really struggle with it.
Right. But we also have I think Chris Williamson said it best recently, that nuance is the, what did he say? It was the N word of 2024. It was like, Jesus, you can't say that, but I just said it, so it's going to be even better. Don't blame me. It's Chris Williamson. But in the red pill vein, in that narcissistic set of humans, speaking of your modality, the challenge is if you listen to sad boys crying on Instagram, they're going to say, women hate me. Everybody wants to fuck a nice guy or a bad boy. And they're going to cry in the same way that Andrew Tate's going to say it with authority. It's the same words.
Right.
Look at it realistically. They're saying the same thing. It's just Andrew Tate says, so take care of yourself. Right. And you need to function and find status and all those things. And, and listen, I love the Tates. Justin Waller's probably a good dude. I'd like to meet him someday, preferably if he's buying dinner. But the whole thought is around status is the new status is the new pickup artistry.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? It's like all these dudes are trying to find and communicate status. Right? Well, there's a great way to communicate status. It's to have status. Right? And to have status means you have that I saw it today. Somebody was, all these sevens think they should be able to date 10 guys, and number 10 as a number on the scale, guys, and that's why this is a problem. And I'm like, well, also sevens don't make a compelling argument otherwise.
I got
right.
you.
So I look at my life. I'm a 44-year-old reasonably attractive dude. Plenty of people think I'm attractive. I don't have a veritable cornucopia of women that are beating my door down, but there are a few, and I'm very lucky for that. And I'm grateful, and that's what I think is missing from the whole red pill vibe, is like this idea of gratitude, and that you have a chance to do the work and maybe stop focusing on the outcome of getting laid and start focusing on the outcome of being joyful, and maybe start focusing on fulfillment and purpose and meaning. And then maybe if status comes, it comes, but there's a good to fair chance that if you're making a dent in the world, and, you know, Glover talks about this too, is like, if you're taking masterful action, making a dent in the world, if you're penetrating the universe, then you're going to be more attracted by default.
Sure.
Right. But it's these dudes sitting in their mom's basement wondering why nobody wants to have sex with them.
Right. And then those are the guys that just be in the Eeyore routine. And I think something that's missing from the red pill world, I mentioned to you James Sexton before we went live too. He's got a good combination. He was just on the Diary of a CEO just a day or two ago. But he's got a good combination of owning his masculine energy, but also feeling his emotions too.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something the red pill doesn't have as much with guys, is owning your emotions as much.
I think emotions are inherently masculine. I think you can't be integrated as a man. You can't be whole if you don't feel your feelings. Right. The ticket is where do you express those? So one of the things I've really focused on in the last year is, you know, I express my emotions and my feelings to my guy friends, and we help sort those out, right? Like we put those together in some sort of synergistic way where like I have dudes that help me put the puzzle pieces together. And because of that, I don't have to go to the feminine with my problems. Right. I don't have to seek validation that way, because I'm internally validating. That's what guys don't understand, is like, your group of friends aren't there to validate you. They're to help you validate you.
Right.
Right. So when you're in crisis and you call your buddies and be like, hey, my girlfriend's driving me fucking nuts. What do I do here? They're going to listen to you. Then they're going to hear you. And then they're going to then you talk. Right. And those solutions kind of come out of that. But most often guys just need to be able to say, I'm fucking pissed off.
Right.
Right. It's the same thing you see is like when we were kids. How old are you?
39.
39. So we're about the same age. Well, no, we're not. I'm 5 years older than you. I'd love to be 39. When we were kids, when I was a kid, I don't know if this is true for the millennials, but you know, when you were at school and somebody picked on you, you got into a fight. And then usually immediately following that fight, you were sitting at the same lunch table, like having food, right? And, you know, the same could be said about bars in my 20s. Like I punched a dude in the face 20 years ago. And, you know, 2 hours later, he came rocking up and he's like, what's up, dude? I'm like, sorry about that, right? He's like, yeah, you know, we were drunk. I'm like, we're still drunk. He goes, you want to drink again? Sure, let's do it. So that's missing from society, is where we've disallowed the caveman, right? And, you know, and we've replaced it with moderation and societal regulation. And, you know, that's why sports like MMA are growing at blistering speeds. That's why we're seeing now backyard boxing is becoming popular on YouTube. And, you know, like, because men do men shit. And I mean, we really do. We have to stop listening to women about this.
I mean, I agree with that. I think men need to know like what the right thing to do is in cases. And it's not to say you don't ever listen to women either. But you just got to know, like as a man, you got to know what the right thing to do is. Right. And you can listen to a woman, but then you still got to know, okay, by my value system, this is the right thing to do.
Right.
And I got to go forward and do that. And I think what happens is when you mix everything together, men are different than women. And I know that's the thing that'll get you in trouble too. But to me, there is masculine and there is feminine, and that's wrong for them. They say that's wrong to even say that too. But you can't expect men to do all of the same, emote and deal with their emotions the same way that a woman will. Yeah. And that's, I think, what they want men to start doing. But I think a lot of women don't even realize that's not even what they want. They don't really want that. They don't really want that. Men need to do what you said, talk to other men about their stuff.
Right. And if they don't, we're talking about, we see it in school shootings. I mean, I've never seen a frustrated female shoot up a fucking mall.
Right.
Right. Because we have an entire societal structure that's broken down, and we no longer initiate our men. Like, boys are not initiated into manhood anymore. We have no rite of passage that really exists. We don't teach them that life is hard. Scott Peck wrote the #1 best-selling all-time book in personal growth called The Road Less Traveled. And the first line in that book is life is hard. And it's accurate. Yeah. But we don't teach boys that anymore. We teach them that they're special, and we teach them to feel their feelings. And like, you know what? Sometimes you don't get to feel your feelings, right? Ask a Ukrainian man, and this is a very Western problem, by the way, but ask a Ukrainian man when the last time he was feeling his feelings as he shot down the battlefield, right? Sometimes there's no fucking time for feelings, right? Feelings are great, and we need to do them, but sometimes there's no time for that, right? Sometimes action and violence are required.
I think my favorite definition of courage is doing the right thing regardless of how you feel. Sure. And it's like Cat Williams, he had that viral interview with Club Shay Shay, Shannon Sharp, and he was saying, everyone's afraid, but the real ones know that in no way stops you from doing what you got to do. So right. Yeah, you can be afraid, you have your feelings, but you still got to keep on moving forward and do what you got to do. And to me, that's what being a man's all about. Yeah, I'm not saying repress, feel it, but understand you still got to do what you got to do.
Right.
You got to handle stuff.
You got to do your job. One of the things that I've said, and I don't know if it was me that ever said it first. I'm the first person I've ever heard say it, so this might be a quote of mine. But you cannot have fear, or you cannot have courage without fear. Because courage without fear, that's just a Tuesday. Right? To be courageous requires fear, right? And we venerate courage. We love courageousness, right? We love bravery, and both bravery and courage cannot exist in any plane of reality without being afraid.
Right. I absolutely agree.
Because if it's not that, you're stupid. Right? So bravery and courage without fear isn't bravery or courage, it's stupidity.
True. And I think I want to circle back to something because it ties into this here too. You said one of the biggest problems people have is they feel like they're a piece of shit. So what do you suggest for people to not think that anymore? What are the ways through?
Okay, first you have to think about resistance, right? So when you're dealing with a belief system that's very old, it's going to be harder to crack than you probably think. And one of the things is you have to stop resisting that feeling, right? So many people, when they like, how do I stop thinking of I'm a piece of shit? You don't. You start thinking really hard about it. Right? You start feeling really hard about it. So you sit on the edge of your bed and you allow that feeling of I'm a piece of shit to come. And you say, what are you? Like, that's one of the things I do a lot is I'm always questioning my beliefs. And that one comes up for me a lot. I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and addiction and all the things I've been through. It kind of led me to having that belief from time to time. And so when I feel it coming, usually it starts in my gut, right? And I'm very in tune to my body. That's one thing you can be is somatically tuned into yourself. And so I'll feel it, and usually it's kind of like my check engine light. And I think a lot of people need to realize that your feelings are very often just a check engine light. So I see it, and like, the light goes on in the dash. I'm like, oh shit. All right. So what am I feeling? Right? That's the first thing I ask myself. It's like, what am I feeling, or what am I believing? And if that I'm a piece of shit narrative shows up, then, oh, okay. Well, that's not fun, but all right, I guess that's what we're doing today. And from that, I usually will ask myself, what am I doing that's reinforcing that? Like, how am I out of alignment?
That's a good one.
With myself, because to build a belief, you have an action or something that happens, right? So you have a moment in time plus a reinforcement plus a story equals a belief, right? So you have something happens, like you fall off your bike. Your dad tells you you're a fucking idiot for jumping your bike. You then hear only idiots jump their fucking bike, and then you never jump your bike again, right? So the belief is only idiots. So the story is what we create. And for me, that I'm a piece of shit. Like when that shows up, that's what I do. It's like, what am I believing? What am I doing or not doing? That reinforces that belief system. And then that usually leads me to something. Those two questions kind of fire up the limbic loop, so to speak, and get the mind and emotions kind of communicating. That's what those are for. And then to get the body involved, because your mind, your body, and your emotions are kind of playing in concert when we think about emotional intelligence. And to get the body to move, or to choose how I move, which is kind of the definition of emotional intelligence. I ask myself two more questions, which is, what would I prefer to believe here? What would I prefer? I know I don't, but what would if I had a preference to believe something else? What would it be? Usually, it's I'm empowered. I'm a kind person. I'm generous. I'm loving. I'm whatever the opposite of piece of shit is in that moment. And then I ask myself, what drastic action would we have to take immediately to make that true?
I like that.
And that's usually how I do it. It's like 4 steps. And I used to teach that in rehab centers years ago. And it's been credited with saving quite a lot of relapses. Because that's what'll happen is, like, an addict will get in that I'm a piece of shit mentality, and it'll screw them up bad.
Sure. And that pour me a drink kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, but what I really like about what you just said, I think it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. I think that's a humor in line. But what you said, that's how you do that. What am I doing or not doing that is supporting this way that I'm feeling or not feeling? And if there's things you are doing to make you feel like a piece of shit, what are those things you might be doing to make you feel that way? Maybe you should stop doing those things.
Right.
And that's the thing where we have the responsibility to take a look at it and say, oh, well, if I do this, this, and this, and that makes me feel like a piece of shit, well, maybe I should stop doing that, that, and that, whatever those things are.
Right.
And if I'm usually doing good when I do X, Y, and Z, well, probably time to continue doing X, Y, and Z.
Well, Jordan Peterson talks about that. It's funny. I was talking to Dr. Glover this morning about this, about how we often will stop doing shit that's good for us.
Sure.
Right. And Jordan Peterson talks about it, take your damn pills.
Right.
And it really does boil down to that. And when you think of that kind of crisis intervention that I do on myself very often, I notice that if I don't in that 4th step, like, what do I need to do? What drastic action do I need to take? It's never stop something. It's always do something. Right. It's always do something. Right. It's move my body. It's move my world. It's, you move your body, you move your emotions, you move your mind. That's it. And so it's always a movement. It's always like, maybe I need to just stand up and shake this out, or maybe I need to jump up and down. Maybe I need to do jumping jacks, push-ups. It can be anything. It can be just go have an ice cream. Like, if I'm really in a bad state, I promise you right now, you will find me in an ice cream parlor. Right. Not a massage parlor, not doing something nefarious. I will go do something that's loving and joyful for myself. Right. I go and get ice cream.
Yeah. And that's what's up.
Right.
And in regards, this is something I've heard you say before too, that it's important to place our boundaries over our value system and not have it be a part of our feelings. Explain what you mean by that.
So there's a couple of things, and I say that loosely, but what I mean by it is this: is if your boundaries are based on your emotions, then they're not boundaries, they're rules. Right. And because, like, it pisses me off when you smoke cigarettes. That's not a boundary. Right. Or, if you drink scotch, it smells like my dad used to, and I don't like it, so don't do that. It's also not a boundary. Right. So when we think about our emotions and our value systems, it's one of the most important things. Like, so I teach people in my classes, in my coursework, to put together a Bill of Rights. And that's really where your boundaries live, is in your Bill of Rights, right? Things like, I'm allowed to have my emotions. I'm allowed to feel my feelings. I'm allowed to be excited about my life. I'm allowed to. So I had somebody in the last class talk about how she'd never written that she was entitled to be happy when she was happy. Right? I'm entitled to my happiness when I have my happiness. What a profound statement, right? But, like, I'm allowed to ask for sex. I'm allowed to be told no. I'm allowed to be upset. I'm allowed to be disappointed. I'm allowed to, like, these are allowances, right? So when you write this as that, and you start to realize that you have some rights inherently in life that you give to yourself, then you're better able to create boundaries.
Right.
Right.
Because when the boundaries are in regards to how you feel,
Right.
they are inconsistent.
Right.
Feelings go up and down, left and right. And if your boundaries are based on your feelings, then you can be blowing in the breeze. And depending on how you feel, your boundaries will move and be different. And it's not a sturdy foundation in that case.
Right. Well, and your boundaries. So when you think of a boundary, most people don't really know what I'm talking about. Right. It's kind of this squishy term. People say, they see it all the time. Like, I set a boundary on my mom. On your mom? What do you mean you set a boundary on your mom? What does that even mean? So boundaries are like, you stepped out of bounds, and therefore there's a penalty. That's it.
Right.
Right. And sometimes the penalties are worse than others. And one of the things that is really prevalent societally right now is people think if somebody steps out of bounds, that you shut them off in your life, period. Because that must mean they're a narcissist. Or maybe they're just trying to learn how to communicate with you, or maybe they don't know how to operate in your boundary set yet, or there could be other ways that this plays out. So if you think of it in that parlance, right? So in the parlance of like sports, so if somebody, for instance, if I say I'm allowed to be respected, right, or I'm entitled to respect, right, so long as I'm acting respectful, of course. But if I say I'm entitled to respect and somebody disrespects me, what I would say is, hey, I don't appreciate disrespect, so I'm going to end our conversation here. We can pick it up again later, but I'm going to need you to come at me with a different energy. That's a boundary. Right? That's assertion of a boundary. Like, I'm going to remove myself from a situation.
Right.
When my son was 1 year old, I had it was his first birthday, and I told everybody that it was going to turn into a disaster at 7 p.m. because they'd worn him out, and they took him for pictures, and they took him for ice cream, and like, guys, telling you what's going to happen. Right? So we were getting ready to go out to dinner, and I said, I'm choosing to take my own car to my ex-wife's parents and my parents. I said, I'm choosing to take my own car, and I will meet you at the restaurant. And they said, why? I said, because I'm his father, and I'm entitled to make that choice. And we got to the restaurant, and it was 7:05. I had just ordered. Steaks were probably just hitting the grill, and he loses his mind. I stood up, and we're in a pretty nice restaurant. Like, it's a place where adults eat, right? I stood up, I picked up my son, put him in the car, I took him home. Because I had my boundary, which is I choose that I do not, I will also, so one of the things I say in my boot camp is that if you set a boundary within yourself, you have to respond to it, you have to react to it in other people, or not react to it, but respect it in others. So if I'm entitled to respect, then I also have to respect other people. Right? So your boundaries are a double-edged sword, and people don't realize that, is if you were choosing to operate by a code, you have to choose to operate by that code. Right? If you expect other people to respect you, you must then be respectful. Right? If you choose to only be around loving and kind people, then you by default must be loving and kind.
Sure.
Right? So the Bill of Rights is a double-edged sword, and people don't know that. Right? They don't get that part, because it's hard to think about, like, oh, this could be my fault.
Right. And then, because if you didn't do that, you'd be a hypocrite.
Right.
Right. You can't treat others in a way that you don't want to let people treat you.
Right.
Like, if you expect it, you better give it. Right. And I think this is another thing people get a little mixed up is they conflate boundaries and preferences. Maybe you could talk about that.
Right. So there boundaries and preferences, also boundaries and rules. Right. Like, if you say to me, I don't like Mexican food, and that's a boundary, you just don't like Mexican food. That's fine. Like, but it's not going to violate your emotional code. if I go have a taco, right? So that's what a preference looks like. Boundaries, I think it's probably in the same vein as rules. Most people think that boundaries are rules, right? Like they're going to tell other people how to live their lives. No, your boundaries are to tell you how to live your life, right? And you tell other people how you live your life, and that's it. That's the end of the discussion. That's why so many people are like, I set a boundary with I had a boundary conversation. With who? Why? Just live your life. And if somebody asks a question, then you have a response. I don't hang out with people that, disrespect me. Right? Being disrespectful is not something I tolerate.
All right. Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
This is a boundary. I'm not sure if we'll call this an analogy or what,
Sure.
But back in the news, maybe about a year or so ago now, there was that Jonah Hill situation where he had his girlfriend and he was saying to her, I don't want certain pictures of you, I think, on her Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
How would you diagnose that situation?
I think first, Jonah got roasted for that.
Yes, he did.
And I think the court of public opinion might have been wrong. Not in the assertion that his boundaries were fucked up, but he's a human being, right? And that sounded to me like a scared man who is jealous. And is that controlling? Sure, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But I think the way to express that is different, right? Like, I don't appreciate somebody that I'm with posting, I don't know, sassy pictures or spicy pictures on Instagram. So let's pretend that's a boundary, right? Let's pretend he really does disagree with that fundamentally, that as a feature of his personality, he's like, I don't agree with that. Well, the way you say that is, hey, I can appreciate your desire to post your photos on Instagram. That's not how I choose. That's not the type of person I choose to be with. If that continues, I will probably just exit the relationship.
Yeah. And I think it's all in the delivery and how you say it. And I think that's the empowering way to say it.
Right. The empowering way to say it is, I will exit the relationship. Right. So I wouldn't be with somebody that was posting on OnlyFans every day. It's the same thing in his mind, right? He doesn't want his girlfriend, the oogle of Instagram. It's fine. And if the thing was that Jonah did wrong, was that he was trying to control how she lived her life. Right. Saying, if you don't do this, you need to do it my way. That's not what a boundary is, right? A boundary is, hey, you're free to do what you like. I will choose not to be with you if you continue to do it that way.
Right. And you give them the choice. You give them the freedom to choose instead of being like manipulative, passive aggressive, or guilt tripping. That's, to me, the difference between boundaries and control.
You really want people to see you naked online?
Yeah, that's weak. I mean, that's weak sauce.
Right. The real shit is, I choose not to be with people who do that.
Yeah.
I'm very selective in my friendships, however you want to say it. If that's who she is, then, she should be free to be who she is, and he should be free to be who he is. And, I think he made a mistake in his delivery, but I also think that was privileged in private communication that she used to get famous.
Right. And I think the mistake people were making about that too is people were saying, oh, boundaries are just for you. But in reality, in a romantic relationship in particular, everyone has quote unquote preferences or rules for others, whether you're monogamous or not monogamous.
Right.
If you're monogamous, you are not going to want your partner sleeping with other people.
Right.
That's just, anyone who's monogamous has that boundary or preference, whatever you want to call it. And it's just a matter of how you enforce it at that point.
Right.
And I think that's the important part too, where in a relationship, it's both of you at the same time, because you are choosing to be a part of someone else's life. If you care about somebody, you are going to want to respect how your partner thinks or feels. Right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to want to put that relationship in jeopardy if you care about that person. And so I think that argument where people say, oh, boundaries are just a circle around yourself, has nothing to do with other people, I think that's partially true, but it's not the whole story.
I think I think mostly true is more accurate than partially. Not to be semantically, arguing, but I think your boundaries are about you. At the
Right.
end of the day, your boundaries are about you. Um, do they require adjustments? Yes. Are they set in stone? No. Will they change over time? Absolutely. Sexual boundaries are a great example of this. Like, you may not be comfortable with something sexually when you're 22 that you are completely comfortable with when you're 42. And so boundaries change over time, and that's part of the thing we have to realize. Like, there's difference between boundaries and hard limits, right? Um, if I was dating a woman, for instance, she was like, "I'm gonna have 5 kids," be like, "Okay, well, we probably need to move on then."
Right.
And that's a hard limit. That's a deal breaker, right? And then so we have the components of that. But when you think about a boundary, it's very often just, what are my values, right? That was a Jonah Hill's, values were being violated, I guess, in some way, or he's just a controlling prick. I don't know the guy. It could be that too, right? He could just be a controlling, manipulative son of a bitch.
Right.
But the likelihood is he's probably a nice guy, and now he's a nice guy with a lot of money, and he thinks the world is going to love him for it, and it doesn't.
Right. And a lot of the nice guys often covertly narcissistic in some ways, where, like you said, you give some alcohol to a nice guy too, boom,
Jeez. Yeah,
the narcissistic person would come out.
Oh yeah, no problem. Like, it's predictable 100% of the time.
Right.
They get loud, they get obnoxious, right? It's a whole thing.
What do you think is the best way to not attract a narcissist into your life?
There is no best way. And in fact, there is no way to not attract a narcissist into your life. If they want to come into your life, they will. And I talked about this in a red flag video I did, that it's not that I don't believe in red flags. I just believe that we need to look at the ones that are inside us first, right? And if one of your red flags is you have a tendency to, ignore red flags, then you've got a bigger problem than the red flags themselves, right? And I think people need to get in tune and in touch with, what does a healthy relationship look like to you, right? And if by, that standard, if you could measure it, is it acceptable, then that's who you are. I know plenty of people that are in narcissistic relationships, and they're actually quite happy.
Yeah.
And they're both narcissistic, and they kind of torture each other, but they know it, and they're doing their own thing and whatever. But the reality is, a narcissist, I think it's an overused term. I think there's a difference between having narcissistic tendency and having narcissistic personality disorder. When you talk about NPD, you're talking about a subset of about 0.5% of the world's population. It's not a lot. We'll call it 5% for totals. Like, we really want to do it, but diagnosably, it's probably 0.5% have been diagnosed. And we'll say it's a 5% US total, or total in the world. It's not a representative sample of very much. And it's fascinating that so many people say narcissism is the culprit, when realistically, I think it's people pleasing.
So you would say that's the reason why people ignore red flags, because of people pleasing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Well, it's either people pleasing. I also think that people pleasing gets mistaken for narcissism all the time.
How so?
Well, I mean, look at some of the behaviors. Narcissists have a tendency to give me 2 behaviors that are kind of key in the narcissistic relationship.
Projecting, lying, gaslighting. More?
Well, okay, so those 3. People pleasers project their insecurities on other people, right? And then try to appease those insecurities so everybody will love and like me.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
Right? So we have we have projection, right? Manipulation, or we said dishonesty, right? Conflict avoidance, blatant dishonesty. Literally will lie to protect themselves, right? To cover up the truth so they are never found out to be the fraud that they are.
Right.
right?
Inauthentic.
Gaslighting is probably not in the spectrum for the narcissist or for the people pleaser very often, but it does show up. But if we look at like behavioral category, like cheating, oh yeah, people pleasers cheat very often, and that's because they seek external validation, just like their counterpart, the narcissist. And it's interesting because Glover talks about this too, which is, and I've kind of molded this, that people pleasing and narcissism are not on the same through line, but they're not. Right. So, when you think about the tipping point between two toxic extremes, you have people pleasing on one side and being a jerk on the other, right? Well, narcissism is, being super, super nice or, pleasing is also on that spectrum, right? When you think of how do I get over that, it's not about how do I become more narcissistic or more selfish or more of a jerk or whatever. It's how do I level up and integrate the parts of my personality that I'm hiding so I can be who I actually am. Right? It's about getting off that through line.
What do you think the reasons are people are hiding parts of themselves? Is it just the shame? What do you think they're afraid of?
Everything a people pleaser does is in some way to manage their own shame. Right? Whether it's a shame of they feel like they're not good enough, or shame of abuse, or the shame of whatever. Could be anything. I mean, for me, it was abuse, and I felt like I was not good enough my whole life. So whatever that is, that's why they do it.
Right. And that's the same as narcissists there too.
Right.
That's everything they do is to cover up toxic shame.
Right. And the same thing as addiction as well.
Sure. I mean, and trauma ultimately is the root of all of this. Trauma response narcissism, trauma response CPTSD, people pleasing, codependency, you fill in the blank. And that's why I like to say the labels of all these things aren't as important as the solutions. Right. I do think there's a lot of people displaying narcissistic traits that might not have full-blown NPD.
Sure.
But it's the behaviors that I think that are important over the labels. And I think, and some people try to make the distinction between avoidance and narcissist or whatever their label would be. But it's like too much time spent on the label distinctions is kind of missing the boat, in my opinion. It's the solutions, whether you are the person with cluster B traits or people pleasing, or you were the victim, quote unquote, of someone like that. The solutions are the same. The solutions will be the same for someone who's an addict, narcissist, people pleaser, and the same, and the person that ignored red flags because they were a people pleaser or they weren't okay on their own. I think that's a big one too, by the way. Just not being okay with themselves. So they need someone else to mirror back to them that they have worth. And that's the codependent version of that, right? Where they're not good on their own.
Yeah, one thing I work with a lot of people pleasers. One thing I say to them very often is like, if you can't afford to work with me one-on-one, just go to Codependency Anonymous. Start there, right? Start learning what boundaries are. Start learning how to take care of yourself. Start learning, be more integrated and find a path forward that's more useful and valuable to you, right? Because look, if you want to be a people pleaser forever, I can pretty well predict the timeline. Okay. You're going to end up alone. You're going to be mad at everybody, and you're going to think you got shafted. That's it. That is the timeline. That's the through line. Same thing for nice guys. Nice guys and people pleasers. I think Glover and I disagree on this, but I think nice guys have some more tendencies that people pleasers don't. But very often it's the same kind of person. And if you aren't willing to make a decision to make your life what you want it, nobody else can do it for you. Right? They will keep taking. People will take what you give them universally. Right? So if you say, Nick, do you want some ice cream? I'm going to say yes. Right? And then I'm going to keep saying yes until you tell me to stop. Right? And so if you want to not attract narcissism into your life, stop feeding the beast. Right. And start feeding you and start taking care of you and start putting you first, or not even first, but start putting your needs as equal to everyone around you. That's another definition of boundaries for me is, boundaries are not about putting yourself first. It's about making yourself equal. Right. And then basing your decisions based on equality, not from, will you love me?
And that's a big one because a lot of times in the family growing up, some people's feelings were more important than other people's feelings, and they were used to putting other people's feelings before their own.
Right.
Because if they didn't, they were guilted, shamed, scapegoated, or fill in the blank. And as a process for those kinds of people to learn to prioritize their own feelings and their own thoughts and put a value to them. And on the flip side, I bet you see a lot of this too, especially in your more advanced clients, is maybe as time goes on, the pendulum swings the other direction and they do something called fortressing, where it's a wall. They have boundaries that are walls, and it doesn't let the good or the bad in.
Right.
But they let nothing in, including like love and intimacy. And I think some of that is a fear of intimacy, a fear of getting hurt. And maybe you can hide behind the veil of really high standards. Some people will say, I just have really high standards. I know my worth. But sometimes I think it could be a little fortressing in there too. Oh, if my standards are this high, no one's going to get in, and then I can't get hurt. I'm not saying that's what it is all the time, but sometimes I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I think when you think of fortressing, kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation we talked about a little bit, was this the red pill version of, what is masculinity. And when we see fortressing, I think that this is kind of a newer version of red pill, which is the black pill, right? Like male superiority and, kind of this incel version of living, right? We see that the nice guy that, kind of really burns out, then has to come back around and find their own way. But the eventuality is anger will just lead you to more of that, right? And when people start to function in acceptance and just recognizing that suffering comes from being attached to a specific outcome, right? So like I do all the work I do and I make all the videos I make, not because I have viral. I love that. Like it's always fun when my video does that. I enjoy when somebody, I'll get an email about our podcast eventually, right? This will go out. Somebody will be like, hey, I heard Joe's podcast. And that'll be really cool. And I really love that stuff, but I don't do it for that anymore. And that was part of the video I made the other day around that apology, is like, I would gotten so hung up in what does it mean to be a creator that I stopped creating what I wanted. And
that's a tough one. It's a tough one to break through that. I think I see that the most in comedians.
Yeah.
Where I see comedians on the way up. They're funny as hell on the way up. And then all of a sudden they get a little bit of money, a little bit of fame, and they lose it. They lose that magic. And it's because I think there's something to be said for the struggle. When you're in that struggle, you're hungry and you're being authentic because you don't have as much to lose anymore. You don't have as much to lose. There's nothing there. So you're just you. But then they get that fame and fortune. Then all of a sudden they'll start tiptoeing a little bit and they'll prioritize other things and they can lose their way.
Right. That's an interesting point. Something that I read, I forget where I read it, but it's like, if you ask yourself the question, what would I do if nobody cared? Right.
That's a good one.
And I think through this conversation, I always get a nugget out of these. That's why I do them every time. And this one, I had Valerie research you, and she was like, "Yeah, this is a good one." So I will chase Glover's tails as long as I can. But but I think I'll start using that when I write my content. It's like, what would I say if nobody was watching?
That's a good way to go. That's how you would be authentic when you're doing it that way.
What if I knew nobody was going to watch? What if I knew it wasn't going to make any money? What if I knew it was going to go viral? What would I say? What would I say to myself today? Because little known fact is that I'm not making videos for other people anyway.
There you go. I will say this: you'll probably get in a lot of trouble if you speak with no filter. That's for sure. Because now, so many tripwires out there and guess what though? That's not our problem. And this is something we should talk about too before we wrap up, is other people's feelings. It's not other people's responsibility to tiptoe around all of their triggers. Like your triggers, your responsibility. Right. And I think, unfortunately, I see this a lot in my space, like with narcissism and abuse, but responsibility And feelings, they don't go hand in hand for a lot of people. They have a really hard time with ownership because, they, like I said, they conflate that with blame.
Right.
It's like, no, you can take ownership and have it not be your fault. And I do think you have to take ownership and act as if it's your fault sometimes, even if it's not, to move forward, because what other way is there?
Right.
And I guess my question for you is, how do you get people to be more okay with ownership, responsibility, working in their circle of influence? Because if there's one thing I see that stops people, it's that. They're blaming the outside. This goes for men that are black pill, MGTOW, the women who are stuck in the victim mode of a different way. They're all, it's the same thing. Blame, no responsibility.
I'm not that good of a coach.
That's a humble answer.
I mean, maybe I don't want to be, because I've tried to work with people in the past that just do that, just want to blame. They want to be a victim. Well, I've tried that. Oh, I've tried that. I've tried that. I've tried that. You know the type, right? You're in coaching. So one of the things I do is, one way you can overcome it is to stop making suggestions and start asking questions. Right? Like, what would life be like if that wasn't true? Right. And I don't coach on my channels anymore. I don't do that in the comment threads. I got a lot of hate in the last few days. It's kind of exhausting, but
Really?
Oh yeah. I did a post about men's problems are men's responsibility, and it's going over great, but it's also not going over well. And I say something, and I allude to something that I'll say on this channel that I've never said out loud, really, is I don't believe the feminine is equipped to deal with masculine emotion. I just don't think it is. Because the masculine emotion is violent. It's problem solving. It's solution finding. That's what we do. Right. It's not enough to talk. We need to come up with a plan. Right. That's why very often when we talk to our women about their problems, one of the things I have to ask is, am I solutioning or am I just listening? Because, also, can you give me the guy version? That's a Dr. G line. Give me the guy version. And so far as I'm concerned, you can't be a victim and accelerate. You just can't. The energies are counterproductive. They're counterintuitive to one another. And if you think the world's out to get you, you're going to find more of that.
Right. I think they invest in it though, too. They invest in, and this transcends everything. It's political, it's social issues. They invest in this identity of maybe oppressed. And that goes into personal relationships too. It's like whatever the personal relationships synonym is for oppressed, right? Victim, whatever. And they have invested all this mental energy and time into that. But asking the question, how's that going for you? And the reason I'm not a fan of it, I'm more of a personal responsibility person.
Sure.
And I think in the political world, it'd be like this. I only want to do things that I can have more control over. I don't want to wait for the government to come save me somehow or do other things. And there are some people that is what they do. And I think maybe there should be some people trying to do that. But that's not how I choose to live.
Right.
I choose to take ownership because I don't want to outsource that much of my life.
Right.
I'm going to just fight to have other people do this. No. Like, we do this, do personal responsibility, do what you can do. And then what else? That's really all you can do.
Right. Let the rest take care of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think part of what makes me popular and part of why I haven't gone to 1 million followers yet is because I say things like, you are personally responsible for your life. Right. At the end, no, people hate that shit. Like, at the end of your life, that was yours.
Now, I am curious, the men and women who didn't like that post of yours about men, What were they saying?
Well, I had some of the black pill incel community playing games in there. I had a couple of women saying, men should be able to talk to women and they can't. So let's just stop talking about that. But it was mostly it was sad boys, right? And I don't have, I said it before. I think red pill and sad boy are the same voice, right? Whether it's Andrew Tate or Justin Waller or whoever, it's like, no one's coming to save you and all those things. I get it. Like, if I say, hey, no one's coming to save you and you're going to have to do this on your own. Or if I say, no one's going to come and save you, you have to do this all by myself. Right? Same fucking language. And I think what the Tates have done is masterful in that way. So they took the language that these people knew and they turned it around. And then they leveled them up. Realistically, they took them from sadness to anger, but now we just have a bunch of angry boys running around. And nobody's really integrated. So neat. Some of them are making good money. Some of them aren't. Who knows? But, you see those guys are a flash in the pan. They usually come and go. Andrew's made millions and millions of dollars selling courses, and good for him. Sure. I hope they do well, and go do you. But my world, I think I want people to function better, and if they can, it's going to be through integrating the parts of their personality that scare them the most.
What men do you look up to?
Good question. It's been a few over the years. Probably right now, Chris Williamson's probably in that list. I really like him. I love his presence on air. I like the way he speaks. I wish I was that attractive and had that accent. So I like him a lot. I think Dr. Glover's probably a big one. He's not only a friend, but he's one of my coaches, and I care very much about what he thinks. And then I don't know. Probably I look up to a lot of dudes that are younger than me, which is weird. Glover excluded, of course, but I'd say that I like Alex Hormozy when I like Alex Hormozy.
You reminded me of him with what you said before. Did you get that idea for recycling content from him?
No.
He said to do that. He said, replay your greatest hits.
Yeah.
And you'll see they do well again. So
yeah,
I thought maybe you watched.
I'm going to catalog everything and try and figure it out because I think there's huge value in it. But I really like him I like the way he does business a lot. So, I think he's really stand up. I think he's not out to screw people. And I think that's really cool.
Right. So, I think it's a la carte. I look up to people in a la carte ways. So Alex Hormozy is a business person a la carte. Right. James Sexton, that divorce lawyer, I like how he can be masculine and own his emotions and hit the feminine part of him too. Right. And then there's like athletes. I admire them for their athletic prowess. But it's very rare do I find a man that the whole package.
Right.
That's more rare these days, in my opinion.
I think so. I've looked up to a lot of men in my life. My dad was one of them. So I'm always cautious about, how I do that. And I think the most important is to find people that resonate with you. Chris Williamson, I think, has done a masterful job with his podcast. I think he's a really cool guy, and his social media presence is great. And if you're listening, Chris, I want to come on the show. So no, I'm coming for you, buddy. Same goes for you, Joe. But I think I look up to artistry more than I look up to success, right? And I think Alex Hormozy is a masterful artist of his craft, and I think Williamson's a masterful artist of his craft, and I think Dr. Glover, again, a masterful artist of his craft. If you look at what I like about men, it's very often subsets of things that they're intensely good at, right? I think that's my favorite culture in the world is the Japanese for this, because they are so focused on quality of craft, that everything is perfect. And I've been to Japan. I'm going again in September, and the sushi's perfect. The sake is perfect. The udon is perfect, right? It's all perfect.
Attention to detail.
Right. And when you deal with somebody that's at that level in any environment, you find mastery becomes easy through inspiration and other mastery.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do admire those cultures as well, because it is the attention to detail and patience too. I think that's something here in the West that we don't really have as much anymore. It's all instant gratification.
Yep.
TikTok attention span, IG reel attention span. It's just, we have everything at the snap of a finger. You want to hear a song from 1964? Just go to YouTube. You get this in. You're listening to it in 30 seconds.
Right. We have throwaway clothes. We have fast food. Ozempic. Pick something. There's a way to do it fast.
Right. And in closing here, I want to ask you, for men and women, for men who are more towards, maybe they're the sad boys, as you called them.
Sure.
What do you say to them?
See if I can get in trouble with the millennials and the Gen Zs. Grab yourself by your bootstraps and do the fucking work. Right. I think the bootstrap, I think it's really unpopular these days, like saying that.
Very unpopular these days.
Right. But sometimes cliches are cliches because they're right. Sometimes you just get to work and quit whining. The world doesn't owe you anything. Right? Only you owe you what you say you owe you. I don't owe you a living. I don't owe you, happiness. If the world was going to give me what I thought it owed me, I'd be the starting center fielder for the Boston Red Sox right now. But I'm not. I'm a podcast interviewee and a fucking Instagram influencer. So you're not going to get what you want by crying about it. So either go and do something or shut up.
And I think part of that is they struggle with more than one thing being true at the same time. It's right. Yeah, it is hard. There is people that are making it tough, but it's also true. You got to do the work. Just because it is unfair and whatever doesn't mean you don't get to do the work. Right. That's how I would see it.
Right. Your circumstances don't have to dictate your results. So just choose whether they're going to or not. Keep doing your thing. Right. And way too many people are, maybe one more thing on that is, stop focusing on the outcome. Do the work regardless of the outcome.
The footwork.
Right. The outcome will come. Something will happen. May not be what you think, but it'll be something. It'll probably be better if you're doing the work.
Okay.
Right. Jordan Peterson says, everything you want's on the other end of 5 years. You just have to write it down and wait. Right. And work. You have to work toward it, but you have to write it down. You have to be prepared to wait. And then, just work hard at it and you'll get there. Right.
I'm surprised you didn't pull Williamson line there. He says, everything you want in life is on the other side of the work you're avoiding.
Yep. That is a good one. Yeah. And 100% true.
So that's what he would say. And what would you say to the women on that post of yours that were upset with you about your thoughts about men?
I think to women that are upset with my message, it's very often the same as the men that are upset with my message. You don't deserve love. You earn love in many ways, right? From others. And not to women specifically, just in general. I don't believe that we are deserving of love. I believe that love is earned by loving ourselves and by growing into something that is lovable, right? And understanding our own value. I think that women have the same proclivity toward excuse making as men, and I don't think anybody wants to talk about it. Right.
I see it. I see it on both for sure.
Right. So I think maybe I would say the same thing to women I would say to men is the world's not going to deliver you what you want. So get to fucking work. Like, it's not this is axiomatic. It is what it is. It's true that the world is not going to deliver you what you think you deserve. It's going to deliver you only what you work for. And sometimes it won't even deliver you that.
Correct.
Right? I could have made videos for 20 years and not gone viral. Right? Like you said it earlier, there's a girl that you had on that's been on for like 5 months. She's been viral every day. Like, right. I look like me. Sorry. So, you know, what does it mean to be you? You gotta figure that out. And, you know, without getting word salady, it's fucking do the work. Both sexes just do the work. Shut up. Just shut up. Do the work.
And that's why I say also, believing in soulmates and unconditional love, to me, they in no way help you. Either one of them, because to act like either one of them exist would almost certainly mean you're going to think, okay, I can do whatever I want.
Right.
And it's just going to be okay because there's unconditional love and there's soulmates. But in adulthood, we do get the love that we earn in adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people would mix, like I know people would be upset with you for saying that because they would say, oh, well, your parents, you shouldn't have to earn love from your parents. It's like, true. But this is adulthood now.
Is it?
I think it's true.
I don't think it's true. I think if you're a dick, your parents won't love you anymore.
I think as a kid, like when you're like 3, 4, 5, 6. But once you're in a teenage years, okay. If you're a dick then, they'll probably act accordingly at that point.
Right. I don't think there's a lot of teenage kids watching our shows respectively. So let's, you know, there's probably not a 6-year-old going, my mom's a dick. But I think what's real is, you know, human beings need to get comfortable with the idea that you don't deserve much. And everything you get, you're probably going to have to work for. And even then, you probably won't get it.
Yeah. And that's how I choose to live life, because I think it's the most productive way to see it. It's the most, one of my big philosophies is, whatever you do, is it helping you to be the happiest and healthiest version of yourself, including how you look at your past, how do you look at your present, what are you doing in actions? Are they helping you to do that? If they're not helping you to do that, then that's a value system that's not helping you.
Right.
And it's it's the closest thing to a black and white thing that I think. It's like, is it helping you, or is it contributing to you staying stuck?
Well, in that vein, I think we saw a lot of that in like the cancel culture stuff where you can't say the truth, right? I think cancel culture's died.
Harrison Butker might be a little has something to say about that.
Okay, that may be true. I think it's dying in many ways. And I think because Rogan, frankly, is paving the path forward, right? Where his platform was so big that we're like, we're going to cancel you. And he's like, go ahead.
Right.
He's
uncancelable.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the Bank of America of fucking podcasting. Like, what are you going to do? So I don't know. I think that would be my answers to both. Just shut up. Just get to work. You shut up and get to work. That's what I had to do. I didn't like it. I was staying in an Airbnb in Huntington Beach, California 3 years ago. I didn't know when I was going to have enough money to pay my rent. I had $60,000 in debt. Right? Like, and that's the third time in my life that's happened. Like, the first time I was staying in my mom's basement in 2018. And again, I had 60 grand in debt. I was going through a bankruptcy. I had just gotten out of rehab. I had no job. I had no dating prospects. My life was miserable. I was fucking divorced. I had $12. I had to borrow money from my mom to buy cigarettes and a burger, right? At 38 years old. I don't want to fucking hear it. Right? I've been homeless. I've done it. So like, and my past sucks. So like when people tell me you can't, probably you can because somebody before you did.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody has been through almost exactly what you've been through, or probably worse, and still come out and done better. So don't tell me you can't. Just tell me you won't.
And I would say to those people that maybe have a problem with what you just said, act as if it's true and see if your life gets better.
Right.
That's what I would say. Because even if you say, it's not true, act as if it's true and see how it goes.
Bill Burr said that the other day. I saw him he said, I just choose to believe everything's going to be fine, because would you rather just believe that anyway?
Yeah.
Right? Why would you want to believe that everything's not fine? It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Right? Stop optimizing. It's the new word, is optimizing. I'm optimizing for, pop culture is doing what it's doing with that word, but, stop this optimization and just start working. And the work will lead you where it leads you. Right. And I say that with true compassion and love for people. I don't do what I do because I don't love people. I hate it when I see somebody suffering needlessly. And the end of suffering comes by recognizing you will always be suffering.
Right.
And so choose wisely how you suffer, and let your life grow rather than die.
And that's a Jordan Peterson truism there too. You can choose your suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for people to realize you say those things because you care.
Right.
Like you want to see people have the best outcomes. You're not there just to validate whatever negative feelings they might be thinking at the time. And I'm a fan. You can validate, but without the push to growth or the guiding to growth, whatever you want to call it, there is no change.
Right.
So I'll validate, but I'm not only going to validate, because there comes a point where you have to get uncomfortable. Yeah. With no uncomfortable emotions, there will be no change. And you can't avoid that part of it. And I think that people who are blaming others and who are in the woes me, there's going to be uncomfortable feelings. There's just no way around it. But choose your uncomfortable feelings, like you said, which were the uncomfortable feelings of doing hard work and discipline. Yeah. Or the uncomfortable feelings of regret and wishing you did.
Right. I mean, I was uncomfortable in my mother's basement, so I moved out. But I had to do a lot of work to get it. Right. And rebuild my whole life. And sure, it sucked and it was sad and it hurt my feelings. And I would cry at night. Like I would have problems with it. Like, the tumult that I was going through. But here I am. Now I live in Paradise in Huntington Beach, California. It's my favorite place in the world, and I've wanted to live here for 25 years. And I've got an awesome house, and I've got 2 great cats. One of them is laying behind me, and my life is good, and it's good because I choose good, right? And I choose to be okay, and I'm entitled to that.
Successful people leave clues.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of successful people have similar mindsets in a lot of ways.
Right.
It's not a coincidence that that's the way it is. And the people who aren't doing so well, it's not a coincidence that a lot of them have similar mindsets as well.
Right. Now, is there something to be said for luck? Sure. Mark Cuban said he got really lucky.
There's luck.
Yeah, Cuban was like, I got really lucky.
I mean, Joe says that too. I mean, I admit, there are elements of things. You don't choose your face. You don't choose your parents. You don't choose your upbringing. All of those things are true. And then there's the luck of who you meet sometimes and whatever. But if you put in some work, you're more likely to have some better luck too. Right. So you can't dismiss it. I don't dismiss the luck element, but it's not the only part.
Right. I go through every open door where podcasts are concerned because I know where I want to go.
Right. Exactly. So Nick Pollard, any closing thoughts here on people-pleasing, boundaries, issues with men?
My good friend, shout out to Mike Pridgeon, of Mike Needs a Plan on Instagram, always says, be kind to yourself when he closes his videos. And I like that very much. But in that vein, Kurt Vonnegut says that we become who we pretend to be. So be very careful who you pretend to be. And of course, hope this helps.
Amen. Thanks for coming on the show, Nick.
Thanks, man.